And I'm joined now by Michael Oren, former Israeli ambassador to the U.S. and fellow at the Wilson Center. Ambassador, good to see you. Now, Vice President J.D. Vance said this morning Hamas may release hostages any moment now. Benjamin Netanyahu says he's ready to immediately receive the hostages. Why has there been some confusion around the timing of the release of these hostages? We initially heard it was going to be possibly tomorrow, even Tuesday. Now we're hearing overnight.
Good to be with you, Ariel. To the best of my knowledge, it has to do with locating the hostages and having Hamas agree to the fact that it actually has the hostages. Remember, Hamas is a terrorist organization. It engages not just in physical terror, but also in emotional and psychological terror. And Hamas had been intimating in the previous days that it may not know where all the hostages are, especially the deceased hostages, and may have to, spend days locating them. And they could then come to the Israeli public and say, well, listen, our lists aren't exactly what your lists are, and the Israeli population would remain in deep tension and psychological distress because not all the hostages have been returned. And I think that there's been some last-minute back and forth between Israel, the United States, and Hamas's backers in Qatar and Turkey, saying that Hamas indeed has to produce every single last hostage.
So if Hamas does produce the hostages that Israel is expecting, talk for a moment about the significance of this moment and of this deal, not only for the Israeli-Palestinian conflict, but for the region at large.
Well, let's begin with Israeli society. For Israeli society, this is a tremendously emotional moment. It's unique to Israeli society, the way Israelis care about hostages, care about their captives. It's an unwritten covenant between the people of Israel and the state of Israel that should Israeli soldiers or civilians be captured in battle, that the state will do absolutely everything in its power to redeem them. And now this has happened, not without a price. 250 murderers of many Israelis now have to be released in prison as part of this exchange for the families of those who have been murdered by these terrorists. It's immensely painful and dangerous, because we know from the past a lot of these murders go back to joining terror. Yahya Sinwar, the head of Hamas, the architect of October 7th, was released in an earlier exchange to get back a single hostage, Gilad Shalit, back in 2011. So for Israel, a truly historic event. For Gaza, the potential to move to the next stage, to rebuild Gaza, to transform Gaza into a peaceful area. And then broadly, for Israel and the Palestinians, the possibility of moving toward a political, diplomatic horizon in the West Bank and beyond, the entire region. Everything hinges, Ariel, on the next step, which, as your reporter said, depends on Hamas giving up its guns and demilitarizing.
Yeah, and that is yet to be seen. They have not agreed to do so yet. Ambassador, Hamas appears to be reconstituting itself in the midst of this ceasefire. We've seen video of them on trucks, and they're saying they're now carrying out civic responsibilities. How will those images sit with Israelis, and what will the security establishment in Israel be looking at during this fragile time?
I think they'll be looking at what the United States, the Trump administration and its teams, Steve Witkoff and Jared Kushner, plan to do to execute or implement this second stage. Because the Israeli army now has withdrawn from 47% of the Gaza Strip. The population of Gaza City has moved back into that city, providing a human shield for Hamas. It's the reason for so much of this destruction in Gaza, because Hamas was using that population and the actual landscape as a shield, including 500 miles of tunnels beneath that. Hamas retains about 50% of its tunnel capacity, Ariel. So it's all there. So military means are not going to be easily executed. Israel cannot go back to fighting easily against Hamas now. So the implementation really has to be in the diplomatic corridor. And how is the United States going to move Qatar, Turkey, and other Middle Eastern powers to convince Hamas to give up its guns? It is not going to be easy. Hamas is a terrorist organization. It's like saying to ISIS, Al-Qaeda, give up your guns. They give up their guns. They're giving up their DNA, and they cease to exist.
So you mentioned that the return to war is unlikely, but if Hamas does not abide by the tenets of President Trump's proposal, what leverage does the international coalition that's being established have to pressure Hamas to coalesce around this? And how will Israel perceive this?
Well, there are a number of tools they have at their disposal. One is there's going to be a tremendous amount of humanitarian aid going into Gaza. In the past, Hamas would steal about 60% of this aid. It would feed its own terrorists and then sell that aid at exorbitantly high prices on the open market. There are efforts to be made to ensure that Hamas cannot get a hand on any of that aid. So it's cutting off its sort of economic oxygen there. It is assuring that no guns can get into Gaza. No money can get into Gaza otherwise. So Hamas will be completely isolated. Qatar, Turkey are going to banish Hamas officials from their territory. No longer will they be able to sit with impunity in Doha or in Ankara or Istanbul. And Hamas will be completely isolated. Now, there are many people in Gaza who have deep grudges against Hamas for the mass destruction they have wrought on Gaza. There are clans, there are militias who are anti-Hamas, and there are actually reports of Hamas terrorists being shot in the streets. Including a prominent Hamas journalist was just shot yesterday by one of these people who have said, listen, you killed my family. You destroyed my home. So there are ways that pressure can be brought on Hamas to give up those guns. It doesn't have to necessarily be by military means.
So, Ambassador, you've been watching this region for decades now. Talk to me about the significance of this moment and the new landscape in the Middle East. You see, Iran has been neutered. The Houthis are essentially mostly irrelevant. Hezbollah has essentially ceased to exist. Hamas is on its heels. What does that mean for the broader region, in your opinion?
Well, decades ago, there was a war fought in the Middle East called the Six-Day War in 1967, which transformed the Middle East. This war promises to be equally transformative, if not even more so. You can see a Middle East in a year from now, which is almost unrecognizable what we've known from decades past, in which there is peace between Israel and Lebanon, peace between Israel and Syria, peace between Israel and Saudi Arabia, which is not just with Saudi Arabia, but with the entire Sunni world, which means the largest Muslims countries in the world, which are outside the Middle East, with Pakistan, with Indonesia. You could see railroad lines connecting the Mediterranean with the Persian Gulf and from there to India. Truly transformative, and peace between Israel and the Palestinians. I can't tell you what form it would take right now, but certainly there's a diplomatic horizon there. And the 20 points developed by President Trump, Steve Witkoff, and Jared Kushner provide for that. That's why it's such an extraordinary document. So everything can change. But again, it hinges on the next step. Will Hamas give up its guns and give truly peace a chance in the Middle East? What a momentous occasion it would be to see those hostages released, to see the lessening of the suffering in Gaza and broader peace accords in the Middle East. Boy, what a change it would be. Former Ambassador Michael Oren, thank you so much for your perspective. Thank you, Ariel.